Thank you so much, Professor Acre, for agreeing to this talk. Hopefully, you will productively engage with Odisha and we'll work together. We are all lazy people. Thank you so much.
Find one image on Konark temple, Bhairav dancing on a boat. So, my question to Dr. Akri, do you find such examples in Southeast Asian countries?
That how you define tantra, because one aspect is, one perspective is when people say you need some materialistic, you have some materialistic desire and you want to have them quickly, you have to achieve them quickly, then you do some rituals, that is tantra. But then
Colloquially in Odia, we call village as Ga.
Good evening, everyone. On behalf of Kalinga History Initiative, I warmly welcome you all to this special edition of our weekly Sunday webinar series. Today is a special occasion for us, not only because of the theme that we are going to engage with today, which is titled Northeastern Indian Script Across Maritime Asia, but also because we have with us an academic, Professor Andre Acre, whose work has significantly shaped a contemporary understanding of South and Southeast Asian religious and cultural history. As many of you know, Kalinga History seeks to bring research-based historical narratives into public conversation. Today's talk fits squarely within that larger intellectual journey. Originally, Professor Acre had proposed to speak on the historical link between India and the Maldives, particularly on the sourcing and circulation of cowrie shells, Gaudi, an important but often overlooked element of Indian Ocean economic history. However, later he came up with today's title because he called it as a theme that is both more widely accessible and deeply resonant with Odisha's civilizational path. Let me say in few words about today's speaker, Professor Andre Acre, PhD from Leiden University in 2011, and he is Associate Professor in Tantric Studies at the Religious Studies section of EPHE PSL University Paris. He specializes in text historical study of Tantric traditions in South and Southeast Asia, with special emphasis on intra-Asian maritime circulation and Shaiva and Buddhist traditions in pre-modern insular Southeast Asia. He has published monographs, edited volumes, and articles on those topics. Besides being the principal investigator of ERC project Mantrayana, which expands to Monsoon Asia as the nexus for the transfer of Tantra along the maritime route. He is a lead researcher in the ERC Synergy Mantram. Again, Mantram stands for Mantras in Religion, Media, and Society in Global Southern Asia. So these two events hosted at the universities of Vienna, Tübingen, Oxford, and the EPHE from 2024 to 2030. We are grateful to him for joining us today and for sharing his insights with the Kalinga History community. With that, I invite Professor Andre Acre to take the floor. Over to you, Andre.
Yes, thank you very much indeed, Sunil, for this introduction and for inviting me to Prita. Was very happy to visit Orissa a couple of weeks ago. I see that Umakant Mishra, Professor Umakant Mishra has also joined us. And I'm very happy because I'm reading one of his articles right now, which is very interesting on an object in that Nagari. So I will first of all try to share my. Okay, so yeah, as as Sunil mentioned, today I will be talking about Northeastern Indian scripts across Maritime Asia, which is a kind of a big topic, but it's a topic that indeed resonates with the maritime history of Kalinga, of Odisha, and the transfer of culture, scripts, languages, and religions across the Indian Ocean and the Bay of Bengal. So some of you may be familiar with the term, the expression Sanskrit cosmopolis, coined by Sheldon Pollock, in terms of a transregional cultural formation that extended from the Indian subcontinent as far as Central and Southeast Asia. In this transregional formation, which is a supranational, of course, it doesn't coincide with the border of the modern nation states, but transcendent them, including an enormous region, which I indeed call Monsoon Asia. So in this region, according to Pollock, Sanskrit language articulated politics, not as material, but aesthetic power, being used as the vehicle of the elite self-representation in all areas of this region. So what does it mean? It means that the political elite wrote inscriptions, mainly royal eulogies, in Sanskrit, not only in their local languages. They actually did so, but they started to do it later. So the first stage, the earliest inscription we have in Southeast Asia, for example, are in Sanskrit, and in India as well, of course. So we are looking about the spread of a language, Sanskrit, a sacred language, but also the language of politics, think about the Arthashastra, the language of the literature, the belles letters, poems, the epics, the Mahabharata, etc., over an enormous area. We may also have, see this enormous region of sea and land as a Buddhist cosmopolis. If we try to focus on Buddhism as the single, let's say, unifying element instead of Sanskrit, or besides Sanskrit, of course, then we can, talk about the Buddhist world or Buddhist cosmopolis and look at the spread of this religion from its cradle in India to the peripheries of the subcontinent. There have been other scholarly constructs, for example, the Pali cosmopolis, which study the networks of Pali Buddhism or Theravada Buddhism across the Bay of Bengal, mainly linking mainland Southeast Asia, so Myanmar, Thailand, Cambodia, and Sri Lanka, which was a very important center, in fact, the center of Theravada Buddhism for a long time in its history. So all this, many of these, terms, expression, they focus, rightly so, on language, Sanskrit or Pali. But what about the scripts, right? Now, we know that Sanskrit was written in many scripts. There is no Sanskrit script. Sanskrit is a language, but you can write Sanskrit in Devanagari or in Grantha, or in Sinhala even, or in Javanese script. In fact, there are dozens and dozens of scripts used to write Sanskrit. One of them was, at least two of them, were siddhamatrka and Nagari. Now, siddhamatrka evolved out of the Gupta Brahmi script and became predominant by the late 6th century, especially in northeastern India, up to the 10th century. And when I say northeastern India, of course, I am including Orissa. As you know, that was the script also used in the country, in the monastic centers. You still have many inscriptions in that script. And I believe even the Odia script is derived actually from that script. Now, by the beginning of the 11th century, siddhamatrka was supplanted by Nagari, which nowadays is the standardized predominant script in northern India. And then there were other offshoots like Proto-Bengali or Gaudi, more towards the east, Ranjana in Nepal, etc. Now, Al-Biruni, the famous polymath who visited India in the 11th century and wrote the history of India, he actually mentioned these two scripts, siddhamatrka and Nagara, which they say differ only in the shape of the characters, but are very similar otherwise. So the interesting thing is that these two, the script and Sanskrit language, are coupled. Not only where do you expect to find them, that is to say in Northeastern India, but also outside of the subcontinent, in region where you don't expect to find them. Why? Because those regions already had their own scripts. For example, in Java, they wrote Sanskrit inscription, Javanese inscription, but they only used the Javanese script, which was derived from the southern Brahmi, not the northern Brahmi family of scripts, like siddhamatrka. So they wouldn't, the literati wouldn't be able to understand the script unless they had some close connection to northern India. So my let's say the gist of my talk is that we need to shift the focus from only language, so study the spread of Sanskrit or Sanskrit Buddhism, to the script itself, the letters used to write a Sanskrit. Now, this research has already been done with respect to Arabic script in the Islamic world. Again, another supranational, supralocal construct, which analyzes the spread of a culture or a language, a literature outside the area where it was born. So this was done by Ronit Ricci, for example. She did not only study, the spread of Islam or Quran, Islamic literature, but also the Arabic script in itself, which was quite productive. In Java, for example, it became a variety of script known as Jawi, right? Now, this link between script and language, Sanskrit, I think it's outside of the Indian subcontinent, is always found as a marker of Mahayana, especially Vajrayana, so Mahayana Buddhist Tantra. Okay, it's very peculiar that you always find this link. All right, so the contexts where you find siddhamatrka were characterized by polyglossia. So literati usually had access to more than one language, for example, Sanskrit, a literary vernacular like Old Javanese or Old Malay, and then probably also other local languages, right? And then you had this kind of, coexistence of religions and state-sponsored cults. Now, as you may know, the script called siddhamatrka became known as siddham let's say, in Chinese and Japanese Buddhist context, especially Tantric Buddhist context. So up to these days, this script is known as siddham and still practiced in the monasteries, in the Shingon, by some Shingon monks, for example. So there is a tradition of writing mantras, syllabaries, or even some sort of sacred calligraphy, bija mantras in the script. And there is a kind of, quite a lot of literature on this. Quite a lot of manuscripts from China and Japan and Korea have survived. And this is quite well known. And for example, you also have Buddhist statues, seals, votive tablets, and amulets. But the siddhamatrka script in Southeast Asia has not attracted much attention. In fact, we can say that siddhamatrka was a northern script, and so far it has been perceived as having traveled through the overland Silk routes with the monks who plied the routes from India to Central Asia and China. But the maritime routes have been overlooked because few people expected to find a so-called northern script in the southern, seas, in the southern Indian Ocean, in Southeast Asia, insular Southeast Asia, etc. Now, I argue that you can actually trace the occurrence of the script and link them to the waves, kind of ebb and flow of the expansion, the traveling of Mahayana Buddhist Tantra from the subcontinent to China via Southeast Asia, so via the maritime routes, starting roughly in the 8th century up to the 13th century and even beyond. Now, we need to ask some questions to explain this phenomenon. Why Southeast Asian agents, actors, so Southeast Asian people, literati, used siddhamatrka, which was a foreign script for them. It would not have been understood to the majority, even of their literate colleagues, instead of the local scripts. That we know there was a really, actually Southeast Asia looks more literate than we thought it would be. So all Javanese poems are full of references to lovers writing letters to each other, you know, or reading, you know, things. So it was quite widespread among, of course, the elite. And so can the use of siddhamatrka script tell us about the networks of Sanskritic Mahayana Buddhism? So we might actually think that some people from India were those mainly who used the script and wrote in Sanskrit by using the script, right? So that is a good marker to show that there were networks coming from the subcontinent. And this is also a good way, I think, to talk about the interrelationship between languages, script, religions, and politics in the Sanskrit cosmopolis of Buddhist world from the 7th to the 13th century. Now, let's say this phenomenon of the spread of siddhamatrka script must be studied along with the wider phenomenon of the circulation of Tantric Buddhism across the vast region that I call Maritime Asia or Monsoon Asia. So this phenomenon was also quite quick, starting already from the late 7th century. We start to have an increasing quantity of evidence showing this form of Mahayana and then Vajrayana, which was obviously sponsored by powerful people in power, by powerful dynasties. We know that there were kings who sponsored this form of Buddhism, of course, in Northeastern India, the Pala, the Sena dynasty, in Orissa, right, the Bhaumakara, etc. Then in Sri Lanka, also some kings of the Lambakana dynasty were supported this religion. Then in Central Java, of course, the Shailendras, some kings in the Malay Peninsula, and other kings in Cambodia, and then that's pretty much it. Especially, and also Sumatra, of course. Sumatra was a very important center of Tantric Buddhism. Now, this is, I mean, you can actually imagine that. I mean, it's interesting to see all these dots there were some sorts of Buddhist centers, on this map. And many of these Buddhist centers where you find Buddhist temples, monasteries, stupas, or hoards with Buddhist objects, they were all located in strategic points, nodes of this network, with easy access to the trade routes. So there was, of course, a very close relationship between the trade and these religious actors like monks, for example, or masters. But of course, this was also very much a business supported by the people in power, by kings. Traders cannot have built Borobudur, or the big temples, Candi Sewu. You definitely need kings to undertake this sort of enormous architectural activities. And so I believe this is all connected, let's say, political power, economic power, diplomacy, of course, and religion. Now, it seems that this siddhamatrka script retains some sort of specialized function in the southern regions of Maritime Asia connected to Buddhism. For instance, let's start from the Indian subcontinent, just to study, comparatively the phenomenon. We see that in the Atirana Chandeshwara Pallava temple near Mahabalipuram, near Mahabalipuram in South India, not very far from where I am at the moment. We have a biscript inscription in Sanskrit. So on one side of the cave, you have siddhamatrka script, and on the other, you have the local Tamil script. Okay, and this is quite bizarre. But why so? Because this dynasty, this king, they were staunch Shaiva, right? They absolutely supported Shaivism mainly. Of course, it doesn't mean that Buddhism didn't exist. But it has been hypothesized, or they really made some pretty strong statement of the superiority of Shaivism over other religions, but at the same time, they also gave, sponsorship. And it has been hypothesized that this situation is there because the kings wanted to make some sort of, statement towards the powerful dynasty of the palace, and so to have some sort of religious diplomacy. Actually, kings used to, exchange gifts, to donate even temples, or, gifts to monasteries, to important, statues of important gods. And by writing in siddhamatrka, by that time, right, in that period, was a sign of being cosmopolitan. The palace were, very cosmopolitan in outlook. And so I believe that this was an attempt to anchor this dynasty to this supralocal discourse, Buddhist discourse in the end, without actually being only religious. There is actually a diplomatic, probably, attempt, in this by script inscription. Same with Chola Chola coins. So you have some coins in Grantha script, as you would expect, because that was the local script. But then also, strangely enough, you have coins in Nagari script. And again, why? I mean, maybe think about, even in India today, sometimes you have, English words written in Roman script, and then you have others, Devanagari. In a Devanagari ocean, you have maybe sometimes some kind of, English word in the language and script that wants to anchor to the kind of, cosmopolitan, globalized discourse. Maybe this is something similar that happened back then. An example that is probably, again, very political in nature is an octagonal pillar with inscription in two different scripts, in Telugu, Kannada, and Nagari, which is, as we have seen, also a Northern Indian script, a bit later than siddhamatrka, is found in Karnataka, Patadaka, so the Chalukya kingdom. And again, this is possibly due to the, basically to the claims that this dynasty was making of overlordship over the whole or a great part of India. So they would make this claim by including scripts that were so-called foreign. And so they had among their audience also people coming from North India, or they wanted to look indeed cosmopolitan, international, and supralocal, so this is also something we find again on the Chola coins, for example, right? So kind of political statements, all right? So because the pala, I mean, say the point of origin, the cradle of Nagari and siddhamatrka was actually seen as an important and respected cultural and religious powerhouse. So it is also possible that they wanted to look cool, and connect them to these powerhouses. And of course, Orisha was very much part of the picture, because these monastic centers that are found there were absolutely among the biggest and most amazing and richest. So Orisha was pretty much at the center, I would say, of this, cosmopolitan and very powerful Buddhist powerhouse. So there is a little bit of Maldives also in the talk, because as I said at the beginning, I wanted to do something on the Maldives, but it's a good example that I can present it. So in the Maldives, as you know, in the Indian Ocean, more than 1,000 kilometers from the coast of South India, you find, let's say, a kind of almost completely obliterated Buddhist heritage, so pre-Islamic heritage that goes back to before the 12th century, when the majority of the islands were converted to Islam, sometimes forcefully. And so these inscriptions are copper plates, which are quite important in the history of the Maldives, because exactly is there where the king declares, this is the Loma Fan edict from the southern part of the Maldives. Southern part of the Maldives means almost 1,000 kilometers from the northern part of the Maldives. So quite far, you know, in the middle of the Indian Ocean. And you have copper plates where the king declares to have, you know, kind of ended the Buddhist Sangha there and created this new dynasty, this new course. And you see that the copper plates are in a local script, which is called Evela Kuru. So, of course, the Maldives also have their local script, which derives again from the southern Brahmi, and is quite similar to the Sri Lanka, the Sinhala actually. But in the left, the first folio, the first plate, you have a seal basically that is in a script that we may call Nagari. In fact, this is 12th century. You see, so this is actually kind of bizarre that still at that time, a king that was Islamic, he was following Islam, still use this older script connected to the Buddhist heritage to make, to stamp the plate. And another example from the Maldives, this is the National Museum in Malé. It's actually find quite a lot of these caskets with offerings, with Buddhist, of course, it was consecration deposits to be put in Buddhist stupas, inside Buddhist stupas. So you find many of these, but not many have inscriptions. And one of them, only one as far as I know, bears mantras and a whole dharani, which I have not shown here, but you can say siddhamatrka script. So this is the probably the Hrim bija, and there is what they call a sun or a Buddhist Dharma wheel, which I've seen actually very similar in Yunnan in China, very very similar, and also in Central Asia, in Dunhuang. So there were definitely contacts. And again, why this object was inscribed with the Nagari script, siddhamatrka script, sorry, is a mystery. But that tells me that there were networks. I mean, there were monks obviously coming from the north, right, from northern India. Now, there is also an interesting example of the use of siddhamatrka in the Pala domains of Eastern India and Sumatra and Java. For instance, so we know that there was a great deal of Pala influence on the ritual, aesthetic, and Buddhist paradigm on many regions of South and Southeast Asia from the 8th, 9th century onwards. And we also know that Balaputra, a king from Sumatra of the Shailendra dynasty, donated, a vihara actually. So for the upkeep also of this vihara in Nalanda, and this was, it seems, quite big, a large vihara in the second half of the 9th century, connected to the reign of Devapala. So this is the famous Nalanda copper plate, and this, which is, as you can see, in siddhamatrka. And so we can say that there were links. We know that there were links between Sumatra and Nalanda in that period. This also is we have also other evidence. There are actually inscriptions bear many similarities. And also we have this interesting quotation in Nalanda itself of a verse of the scripture called Bhadrachari Pranidhana, which is part of the Gandavyuha. And this Bhadrachari Pranidhana happens to be very important on the Borobudur. So it is depicted with great detail on many, many panels of the Borobudur. And so it is known that a monk actually from India visited Java and probably who translated this text into Chinese, so on the way to China. So probably there was an influence, an exchange of ideas, and this text had to be important in Java, but also in Nalanda. It is the only quotation found in India of this text, which is quite remarkable. This is one of the inscriptions left by the dynasty of the Shailendra, who ruled in Java around the late 8th to the mid 9th century. And you see this, there are 4 inscriptions only. Now, there are actually hundreds of inscriptions from Java from this period in Old Javanese script, and some in Sanskrit language, but mostly in Old Javanese language. There are only 4 inscriptions in Sanskrit and siddhamatrka script. So this is one of the 4. They are also all relatively small. You can say almost portable, they could have been moved. They were found in temples, and ruined temples, of course. This is the Kelurak inscription in the museum in Jakarta. This is, I believe, the Ratu Boko inscription in fragmentary state. And this is another of those inscriptions. So we can say something interesting about these inscriptions because they actually mention people from the Indian subcontinent. It's quite rare in the epigraphy of Java to find these precise mentions. So one of them is the Kelurak inscription from 782, who explicitly says that the Raja Guru, so we are talking about a person of high standing, let's say a right hand almost of the king in religious matters, at least an advisor, a royal, a person who had access to the court and was expert in religious matters. So the Raja Guru was called Kumara Ghosha and was of Gaudi Dvipa, so the region of Northeastern India, the Pala domains, basically, Bengal. And it's very interesting because it's not the king who, built the monastery, the temple, and installed the statue, but he ordered, so to speak, is not really ordered, but instigated, impelled the king to do so. So the first, mover is the monk, is the Rajaguru, not the king. And so a statue of the Bodhisattva Manjushri, for the king, Sangrama Dhananjaya. Okay, so this is interesting. It's no wonder that this inscription is in siddhamatrka in Sanskrit, perhaps because maybe Kumara Ghosha himself or one of the, say, panditas who were invited at the court of Sangrama Dhananjaya, probably composed these inscriptions, engraved these inscriptions, and were able to read them and to, to compose and to read them, of course. So there is also another interesting case of Old Malay inscription. So Old Malay was a language spoken in, let's say, Peninsula Malaysia, Sumatra, and also found in Java. We have a handful of inscriptions in Old Malay. Near Candi Sewu, this again important Buddhist temple in central Java, mentioning a local man of, political figure, Randalurawan, having a vision of the Bodhisattva Manjushri at Vajrasana, probably Bodh Gaya. Is this an evidence of a pilgrimage to India? So that there were contacts, from both people from India, but also people from Java traveling to India, and maybe the acquaintance with the same guru, because the cult of Manjushri was obviously very important, and Candi Sewu was, dedicated to Manjushri, although no statue has been found. Now, another inscription of Candi Plausan. There are 2 actually temples there, temple monasteries. Describe the worship of a Buddha temple, Jina Mandira, by pilgrims arriving from Gurjara Desha. So this Gurjara Desha might have been actually in India. So again, another evidence of Indians, being even going on pilgrimage to Java, so to worship in the temples on that island. And also another very interesting case, another inscription in siddhamatrka and Sanskrit language, the Abhayagiri Vihara inscription on Ratu Boko. Ratu Boko is a hillock in central Java with some very interesting, constructions. It's not sure actually if there was a monastery or a palace, And this inscription mentioned the construction of a monastery for the Abhayagiri Vihara and its monks. The Abhayagiri Vihara was a very famous monastery, eclectic monastery in Sri Lanka, in Anuradhapura. And this monastery is actually, let's say, was a part of this monastery was devoted to the practice of Vajrayana. We find Dharanis there. And so all the chronicles actually say that this monastery was Mahayana and Vajrayana, but then it was kind of, this religion lost to the Theravada. The kings actually started to even, to stop donations, etc. So what is interesting is that besides the inscription saying, okay, there is the Abhayagiri Vihara, and for the monks from Sri Lanka, we actually find similarities in the architecture. So we have this entrance, the staircase found in Sigiriya, which is also very strange, hillock in the middle of a flatland with ruins that, again, not sure if it was a monastery or a palace, and we find many similar architectural elements. And maybe the interesting thing to say is that in the ancient period, the people of Central Java called that region Lankapura, so the kind of the realm of Lanka, as if it was some kind of, Sri Lanka. They were Buddhist, of course, so for them, Sri Lanka was the center of Buddhism. Now, since I mentioned Abhayagiri Vihara, here is another example. Sri Lanka has its own script, Sinhala script, and language, but we have some strange, out of place Dharanis, so actually stones, pillar inscriptions. I think there are 12 of them, precisely where they were supposed to be in the Abhayagiri Vihara, what is deemed to be the Abhayagiri Vihara. It's called the Dharanigara nowadays, at the site of Anuradhapura. So this inscription, the Dharanis have been identified. There are connections with the Sarvata Tathagata Tattva Sangraha and other texts already by Chopin. And so again, I think we have an example of these links, of these networks of monks from maybe Nalanda, or Odisha, let's say, places where this script was the common script to write Sanskrit, and so that they would use the same script. And you see also these inscriptions, like the Javanese ones, are quite small. They are not the very, very big, monumental inscriptions. Now, about the Shailengas of Java, why their inscriptions were written in a foreign script? Why not in Javanese script? Again, maybe they wanted to be cosmopolitan, again, to sound cool, to sound connected to the Sanskritic world of the Pala domains, of Odisha, etc. And so they wanted maybe to anchor this to the Pan-Asian Sanskritic Buddhist tradition, which was driven precisely by these big monastic centers, which are very well connected to the Sumatra and Java monastic centers. Maybe they had also diplomatic ties. Maybe they were making statements, not much for the local people, but for the foreign people. The pilgrims even came there and from India, and they could read the script, and they could know who was the ruler, and etc. So, or maybe indeed the people who wrote this inscription were Northern Indians who were trained at Nalanda, Vikramashila, etc., and were royal literates, and so they were hired by the Javanese kings, and for some reason they, maybe naturally, they wrote in the script that was most familiar for them. But there is also an interesting twist to this story, because as Pollock has theorized, at some point, pretty much, we can say around the 9th century, at least in Java, for some reason, Sanskrit inscriptions just stopped to be produced abruptly. And instead, you have Old Javanese language inscription, and of course, Old Javanese script. So script and language, Old Javanese. Right? Now, there is an inscription which is very important. It's one of the earliest versified pieces of Old Javanese. This inscription is found near the big Shaiva temple of Lorojongrang. So this is Chandi Shiva, and it mentions a new dynasty, a new king. And from this moment, you don't have any more Buddhist architecture in Java except small temples of stupa. So all the big temples are Shaiva. And this inscription is interesting because it mentions some political struggle, so the Shailendra kind of finish their rule. And there are allegories also with respect to the Ramayana, political power. But the interesting part is that the back face of this inscription appears to have been effaced. So as you can see a bit faintly, this face was actually inscribed in siddhamatrka script. But for some reason, the king who issued the inscription on the other side decided perhaps to efface it, to delete it so as to cancel any memory of whatever predecessor was there. This is, of course, a hypothesis. Maybe description of those efforts for other reasons. Maybe it was a by-script inscription. It's also possible. But to me, it is more likely that there were actually problems, and this involved also the relationship between Shaivism and Buddhism. There were a lot of tensions in that period in Java, and somehow Shaivism prevailed, and the kings actually stopped to, sponsor big Buddhist temples. And yet, even if this kind of shift to the vernacular and the old Javanese script happens and to Shaivism, we still have the use of coins. The same as in India, you find this masha, so these ma coins, which have Nagari or siddhamatrka characters stamped on them, And some of these characters actually with time, so it's interesting to follow in time, across the 9th, 10th century, they became ornamental. So in the earlier specimen, you can still see on the left ma, it means masha is a unit of measure. But in the other, this becomes almost like an ornamentation. You can hardly see a ma. So it's like the people kind of forgot, they stopped to actually identify, to understand the meaning of that script. Because nobody cared. There was nobody there to kind of, again, have this Sanskritic, culture, and siddhamatrka script was no longer understood. So they started to become like flowers almost, like ornamental motifs. And this is also very, very evident in the seals. You have some seals with the clear, siddhamatrka and Nagari letters. But then these letters, as you can see here, become just ornamental. They just don't exist. They look like, siddhamatrka. So this again can be explained in many ways. It could be that again they kind of lost the idea, or maybe they wanted to. They didn't exactly know how to do it, but they wanted to look like siddhamatrka or Nagari because kind of perceived as prestigious. It's almost like I have a shirt with some Indian script on it. Yeah, I bought it in Rishikesh. It's from India, but it's not actually any existing script. Looks like the Devanagari, but it's not. Yeah, I think it's just for foreigners who like the idea of having a shirt with some Indian script that look like Indian, but it's not Indian script. So something like that. All right. So yes, I mean this. I mean it's a fact that if we want to link this. The siddhamatrka inscriptions and the dharani, etc., to real actors, human actors, well, we have actually plenty of evidence to do so because we know that acharyas, panditas like Shubhakara Simha, Agajana, Vajrabodhi, etc., Mogavajra, and all the lineage, and pupils, etc., including the Javanese, Bianhong, Kukai, so they all were part of similar networks. Most of them, if not all of them, they visited. Most, not all, of course, many visited Nalanda and let's say the Eastern Indian monasteries. Case of Shubhakara Simha, actually, we have, he was a native of Odisha. So they had links with this Pala realm, or at least the realm where the siddhamatrka was used. And they all traveled through Southeast Asia and to China. So again, this kind of, very mobile set of class of people who transmitted initiation and Vajrayana all the way to Japan. And then we go a little bit later. So we are already in the early 11th century. We have Atisha, Dharmakirti of Suvarnadvipa, Dhanapala, or Shihu in Chinese, Sri Gautama Sribhadra in the 13th century. So we have a kind of second wave of Tantric Buddhism that is also associated in this way now to Eastern India, but also to Nepal. Especially Nepal, the Kathmandu Valley, but in general, all the kind of Northeastern Indian regions. And in this case, we have a diaspora. So we know that these masters traveled, especially in the 13th century, due to the Turushka, so the Islamic invasions and the ruin, more or less, less powerful monasteries. Many of them were destroyed. Others just, were not as flourishing as before. And so these people were kind of, we can connect them to these various regions of Maritime Asia, and they really all traveled both by land, but especially by sea, because the sea was actually the easiest way to move, big quantities of merchandise, of goods, and the most heavy goods. They couldn't travel, on camels or horses. They mostly needed to be moved. The porcelain. We found some shipwrecks in Java, literally hundreds and hundreds of thousands of Chinese porcelain, and some Buddhist ritual implements. Some Buddhist vajras, bronze statues. So these monks traveled on these ships, that connected all these places, and they initiated people. They look for text to translate and wrote text in their turn. Okay, so again, this is another class of siddhamatrka inscriptions from Java, gold leaves or plates. It is not a monumental royal inscription, but the kind of inscription containing dharani, so these Buddhist formulas that were probably used by monks, by Buddhist specialists, either to consecrate buildings or to do some magical operations to protect or to harm somebody. We also know that those things also existed in the past. There was this kind of Buddhist magic, Tantric Buddhist magic, to protect the kingdoms and harm the enemies, right? So we have this, basically these various objects with siddhamatrka, and in this case, we also have, I should say, this is a table actually by Damé, a French scholar who died in the 60s, 70s. And so that there is the development of siddhamatrka and Nagari in Java in various known inscriptions and objects, including also Bali. I think I will show some slides later. But another interesting class of objects carrying siddhamatrka inscriptions are statues, bronze statues. They are very beautiful, and many of them carry the ubiquitous mantra Ye Dharma, Hetu Prabha, etc. But some also other mantras like Jinajik, and some of these are in siddhamatrka. Not very many, but I'm aware about 20 or 30 such statues out of hundreds and hundreds. In this case, it's a very beautiful Buddha in Bhadrasana from central Java, which has this mantra Jinajik and then the Ye Dharma. So again, why we have, so where this you kind of say that these statues were cast in India. This is not in Indian. This clearly has Javanese features, and yet the inscription is in siddhamatrka. And so did this belong to a monk from India, or maybe again it was belonged to the king who for some reason wanted to have this siddhamatrka inscription, or maybe again it was part of this temple with the Indian gurus like Maraghosh, etc. This is also a question. So, or maybe that the siddhamatrka belonged to the curriculum of every respectable monk in Java, and they kind of like to, again, to write in that script. Now we go to a little bit later, so this kind of second wave, beginning of the 11th century, and we find the text, so the syllabaries, the Varnamala in Siddham, in the Chinese canon, find many documents in the Buddhist canon with having Siddha characters, and probably again this text was translated by Maitreya, and this is one of the names used by Suvarnadvipiya Dharmakirti, so this famous monk from Sumatra, usually attributed to Sumatra, where Atisha went to study for 12 years, according to some Tibetan biography. Now, it seems that these were very important, these kind of documents. I mean, for us, it doesn't really say much, but they were all very interested in this siddham script manuscripts. And so Dhanapala is a very interesting monk in Chinese, Shihu, who lived precisely at the beginning of the 11th century, and he translated the Vajratantra and the Guhya Samaja for the Chinese emperor, and he knew the language of Sumatra, so probably all Malay, or the language of Kunlun, etc. So he was absolutely, active in this part of the world, in Sumatra, the Southern Seas. But then for him, the most important text was this Varnamala, which may appear now less important than the Guhya Samaja or the Vajratantra. So for some reason, it's quite strange. Now, we know that in Sumatra, Sumatra was really a very important center of Buddhism, in spite of the fact that almost everything has disappeared, except for the very huge site of Muara Jambi, where you have, it's one of the largest in Southeast Asia, actually, even larger than Angkor Wat. But everything has been reconstructed because basically you just have the foundations of bricks, brick monuments. Now, from Sumatra, the northern and central part of Sumatra, you have quite a lot of these very interesting inscriptions on plates, tin plates, gold plates, silver plates, again in siddhamatrka script. And this usually have, actually more we can say Nagari, because this is a later stage, so we should definitely say Nagari. And this, all of these inscriptions contain either, direct citation of the Vajratantra or mantras that you can trace more or less to the cult of Vajra and the Vajratantra. So this important tantric cycle that became very much followed, by kings were initiated in the 12th and 13th century all over, Southeast Asia and East Asia, also in China. So in this case, you find the Vishva Vajra, so this cross Vajra in the center with the hum syllable, which is also connected to a Vajra. Not exclusively, but it tends to be connected to a Vajra in this period. Another of such foils, the Tandihan. Two, you have this typical Vajra mantra, ha ha, hi hi, hu, etc. And the Vishva Vajra, very quite beautiful object. And another example on stone with the same hum mantra, and then the Puja Devata, the Pandaravasini, etc., Mamaki in the corner, the syllables. And in this case, also we have other, Dharanis. I think this is one of those gold foils, which directly cite the Vajratantra. This is actually very unique because this citation of text, of sutras, Mahayana sutras, but especially Vajrayana tantras, are very rare. In India, they are basically non-existing. But in this case, you see that there is tadanu, so there is really reference to a part. The mantra is not just circulating in some form, it's really taken from the Vajratantra. So the Vajratantra was definitely followed in Sumatra in that period. And this is, it's not surprising at all, because you already know that Atisha went to Sumatra, if the Tibetan biography are correct, of course. And Atisha was himself connected to a Vajra, actually had this dream that the Vajra told him to go to Sumatra, and the Savarnadvipa Dharmakirti was also connected to this tantric tradition. In fact, we also have a recent inscription. I published an article with some colleagues from Indonesia in 2025, and this inscription from Muara Jambi, so from the place where possibly Dharmakirti was active, there is a fragmentary strip of copper mentioning the Chudamani Varma Vihara in South India, in Nagapattina, and the Baladitya Vihara, which is probably at Nalanda, and the gifts from the Southeast Asian king to this establishment. So there were exactly in that paleographically, we are in the beginning of the 11th century. So there was actually a flourishing network of people, masters, who used, of course, they could use the script between India and Southeast Asia. Now we move to the final part, and the 13th century, so the final wave of the transfer of Tantric Buddhism from India to Java. And we have this very interesting king called Kartanagara. I'm sure most of you have not heard of him, but it's very strange. You might have heard Jayavarman VII, this kind of iconic kings. But Kartanagara was an absolutely, important king for world history, I would say. He was one of the king who managed to defeat the Mongols, the Mongol troops, the fleet that was sent by Kublai Khan. So he was a contemporary of Kublai Khan and attempted 2 times at least to invade Java, but unsuccessfully. And Kartanagara undertook some very large architectural, works, but he also left dotted Java and even Sumatra with very big statues. We are talking about 3-4 meter high statues, the biggest statues in Indonesia of all times, we could say. And also bronze statue of the Bodhisattva Lokeshvara. And many of these statues are actually 5 of them, I think. They have the formula on their back. So again, there is kind of very complicated discussion about why Kartanagara did this. Kartanagara fundamentally considered himself an incarnation of Lokeshvara and also of the Krodha, so the angry form Mahakala, which was, by the way, precisely the form venerated by his enemy Kartanagara. And the Mongol troops were actually, they had temples, devoted to Mahakala. They were bringing his banners on the battlefields. So he was initiated. We know that he was initiated in Tantric Buddhism and also followed Shaivism. So he was a syncretic cult that was elaborated. And interestingly, it seems that Kartanagara really invited Northeastern India, but specifically Nepalese gurus, so Newar gurus, to his court. And we also know because we have statues, and these statues are Javanese, but they also have some kind of, Northeastern Indian aesthetics to them. And you can see there is script there, which is the form of script. I wouldn't know how to call it, honestly. I mean, I could say it's Nagari, or to me is almost looking already like, it's kind of Ranjana, or so it's definitely a Northeastern Indian script used in Nepal as well. And so you have the name of the deities, in this case, Lochana, etc., and all these subsidiary deities, yes, Lochana. Barali, so Barali is also there. By the way, Newar is the same. Batari is Barali, and I believe even in many parts of India, perhaps even Orissa, you have these Prakrit forms, Prakritic forms. And so we know that actually Nepalese masters traveled across Asia in that period, and also masters intending artisans, sculptors. So we know Aniko Anige, who worked at the court of Kublai Khan. He was from Nepal. And he also, sculpted Mahakala statues. One famous Mahakala is actually linked precisely to that artist. And some of them ended up in East Java, producing beautiful statues, mixing Javanese and Northeastern Indian aesthetic elements. And one of these cases is also the majestic dancing Bhairava from Chandi Singh Osari, also sponsored by Kartanagara. And you can see it bears an inscription also in Northeastern Indian script, Chakra Chakra. Now, why Kartanagara again used Northeastern Indian script? Even if he invited foreign, artisans and gurus, well, Kartanagara was a very cosmopolitan, sovereign. He definitely looked beyond Java. In fact, he conquered Sumatra, South and Central Sumatra. He conquered Bali, and there was a sphere of influence over maritime Southeast Asia, which clashed with Kublai Khan, with the Mongols. So trade was flourishing, but they had diplomatic issues with the Mongol, of course. And so I don't know, maybe again for the same reason, he employed Northeastern Indian sculptors and religious masters, and he didn't care, quite the contrary, if they wrote inscriptions in their own script. He wanted to show that he had this very prestigious, expensive, we can say, specialist coming from overseas to initiate him and to, create this iconography. This is another very interesting, enormous statue of Chamundi, which is also connected to war, you know. And so at the back, it is a bilingual inscription basically, because it is Chamundiaye Om Chamundiaye Nama, and this part is in Nagari script and Sanskrit, while below there is an inscription in Old Javanese and Javanese script. You know, so you still have the kind of the most important invocation in Indian script and the rest in the local script. And then we have another inscription precisely at the same moment, maybe a couple of decades earlier. In this is called the Pasir Panjang inscription, which is on an island not far from Singapore, in fact, between Singapore and Sumatra, in the Riau Islands. And this inscription says pretty much that Sri Gautama Sri Bhadra, the Mahayana Pandita, Gola Pandita, so from Gauda, actually, Gauda Pandita, so from Gaudi, the Bengal, passed from here, you know, from this place. It's actually a rock inscription overlooking the sea, close to the beach. And this is again a script that you can find in Nepal in the 13th century. And this monk, Ian Sinclair, a scholar from Australia, he actually has reinterpreted this inscription. He has linked it to this person, Gautama Sri, who was a pandita, a learned pandita from Northeastern India, who also was active in Kathmandu. And there is a monastery, Tambahi, in Kathmandu, which I visited last year. And there are two inscriptions which mention this monk, this very monk, in the same script in Sanskrit, saying that this monk contributed to the revival of the monastery after the earthquake that almost destroyed, you know, the city. And then there was a diaspora, precisely because of the earthquake, or because of course, as I mentioned, the Islamic invasion, a diaspora of these monks all over Asia. And so this Gautama Sri ended up again at the court of Kublai Khan. You know, he was the preceptor of the famous Pakpa, so the Tibetan master, who was the closest advisor and religious advisor of Kublai Khan. And they were all initiated in the Kalachakra Tantra, you know, in the Vajra, and they were giving initiation to the kings. I believe precisely because those systems were followed by kings who, you know, let's say, used them as state protection Buddhism. So to defend the kingdoms, to conquer foreign lands, to grant them long life, you know, and prosperity. So we can trace, you see, by looking at this script out of place on a remote island of Sumatra where we have nothing, no Buddhist remains, nothing at all. You can actually trace this person to Eastern India, Nepal, and China, you know, and so obviously he traveled. And maybe he went to Java, you know, it kind of makes sense that you have to go through the strait, but then you might very well go to Java and then maybe go to China after that. Now, I'm finished basically. I just can mention, of course, there is also a very, let's say, enormous quantity of the ceilings, you know, stamped with, you can say siddhamatrka is illegible, but it's the Yedharma formula. You find thousands of them all over Asia. So in this case, probably this was stamped, you know, by the thousands. And so these objects circulated, and I'm pretty sure that the common person who brought these votive ceilings, they were usually offered, you know, to the dead, you know, near Buddhist stupas, etc. They probably had no idea about, you know, the script. In fact, you can barely read it because it's so small. But this is the Yedharma formula written in, you know, siddhamatrka script. And but you also have other interesting things, Dharanese, you know, and this from Bali. So Bali is basically the southeasternmost frontier of the script in Maritime Asia. And you even have a biscript and bilingual Sanskrit and Old Balinese inscription from Bali, from a port of southern Bali, in siddhamatrka and Balinese script. And again, this is kind of a political, you know, there is nothing about religion and Buddhism here, but again, this tells us that by the 9th, 10th century, still there was this kind of cosmopolitan outlook, and people coming maybe from Java or from other places, they kind of they were expected to know the script, and so there is a part that is kind of readable for them as well. And the other things, I mean, from the Malay Peninsula, you have a lot of these ceilings. They're probably the pilgrimage, so people carrying these things, across Asia, and yes, for so this reason is mainly, I think, just religious merit, pilgrimage, and there is not much in terms of that diglossia, etc. This also the same ceilings, you have find quite a lot of these ceilings with the Northeastern Indian script. Okay, so I finish here. Thank you for your attention. And yes, I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Professor Andre. It was really very, very enlightening discussion. And I'm sure our participants today have enjoyed this talk, and they are also willing to engage with some discussion. So I will hand over the session now to Ms. Prita Raut for moderating the question and answer session. And I would request Ms. Prita that Professor Umakant Mishra has expressed interest to share something. So kindly let us start with Professor Umakant Mishra. Then I have some questions, but I would ask them towards end of the session. So over to you, Prita.
Okay. First of all, thank you, Dr. Acre, for this very, very enlightening talk today. I would request you to kindly stop sharing your screen so that you can see all the participants in. Yeah, this will be easier to. So first, let me invite Dr. Umakant Mishra sir. Please unmute yourself and please speak.
Yes, yes.
सर आपण वीडियो भी ऑन कर दियंतु आज्ञा नमस्कार
Namaskar, namaskar. Thank you so much, Professor Acre. Am I audible?
Yes.
Yeah,
Yes,
again.
thank you so much. Thank you also, Mr. Sri Sunil Vishwalji, for hosting this and inviting Professor Andre, who is a leading scholar on Southeast Asia. Coming back to siddhamatrka, you know, and everybody, for everyone's information, the term siddhamatrka was used first by Al-Biruni in his Kitabul Hind. It could be because this was used by the perfected one, or because of the, the matras, which suggests some kind of perfection. The word is used siddhamatrika. Therefore, both could be the case. Because of the character and the perfection in character in the script, or because of the fact that perfected ones use the scripts. And what we see the use of the script across different spectrums. Politicians used it. So also we have the Saiva and the Buddhist inscriptions also use it. Just for information, in Odisha's paleography, the term siddhamatrika has largely been avoided, and instead the paleographists have been using the term Kutila script. Why this is important? Because not only because I could have shown, because Professor Andrea might recall that way back in the last resource meet of SOAS, I also made a small presentation on Siddhamatrikas of Odisha. And the term Siddhamatrika is not used, but most of the inscriptions, for example, Pala inscriptions has been used by the paleographist as Siddhamatrika, Ratuboko, Abhagiri, and many others. But in Odisha, where we have the Tantric Buddhism and Tantric Saivism prospering in the time of Bhumakaras, the Bhumakara inscriptions are in Siddhamatrika. So the term used is Kutila script. I could have some of the examples I could have shown you For example, the Khadipada inscriptions, the Avalokiteshwara inscriptions that I showed you, which was shown as Bihar being the provenance. Um, Many of the inscriptions, like that of Dharmapala, Bhumakaras inscriptions, are actually in Siddhamatrikas. The second point I want to note, therefore, the close associations of Bhumakaras with this script when Tantricism, both Shaivism and Sakta, or Shaivism and Buddhist variety are on ascendancy, are also the period when Siddhamatrikas are in use in Odisha. Second thing that we see here, that this script gave way to Proto-Nagari after 9th century. Therefore, siddhamatrka has a lifespan from, let's say, 6th, 7th century to 10th century, not beyond that. And this has been the case, I believe, all over. You won't get that siddhamatrika script in the Sena period. You will get them in, later Senas won't use siddhamatrikas, I believe. Uh, and regarding uh, Ratuboko and Abhagiri Vasini, as everybody might be knowing, we have the same kind of Buddha Garbhalankara Lakshadharani, which Sopen has edited and which we have in Bhubaneswar Museum and elsewhere. It's quite popular in Indian Ocean Buddhist Network. We have the same kind of Dharani being written in the same Kutila script here, and which we call as Siddhamatrika in Avagiri Dharani inscriptions. These are small observations. Are you being the expert? You brought in Gautama Sri. Also, Jina Kim, and I've been also making this argument that the word Bharali, Lochana, Bharali, Hayagriva, all that we find in the image inscriptions of Chandi Jago, which are now in National Museum, Jakarta, and elsewhere. This is close paleographically. I am not the only one talk about so. Also with the later with the Ganga inscription. If you look at the Sanskrit inscriptions, that requires a little bit more study. But if, for example, exact va ra you will find also in Ganga inscription. I am referring to the Kendupatna plate of Narasimha II, one of the successors of Narasimha I who constructed Konark Temple. Please have a look at the Narasimha, Kendupatna plate, which is available in Epigraphia Indica, and look at the script and the Chandijago image inscriptions like Bharali, Lochana, Bharali, Pandaravasini, Bharala, Hayagriva, all these we find them. Obviously, and Professor Acre also mentioned about the circuits that transcended, transcended trade, polity, Buddhism. It involved many things. Therefore, we cannot talk about only the Buddhist networks. That would be at our own peril. There are many networks. There is a textile boom also in 10th, 13th century, where Kalinga, along with Aryaputra, Dramila, Sina, Singhala, Kemera, Ramanadesha are also mentioned. But what is quite significant for Kalinga people is that Kalinga seems to be a continuity, even though Dramila, that is Tamil, gives way to Cholikas, or Sina makes an appearance after the during the Song period when Chinese junk entered the Indian Ocean. Probably we have one name Kalinga, not being a generic name to South Asia, but refers to a specific geography of South Asia, which is clear because otherwise they won't have mentioned Aryaputra, Lata, Karnataka, Pindarika, and others. That suggests that there are many ways these networks existed, and Wagd and Odisha obviously figured in. In that connections, one can also refer to archaeological evidence of no Persian glazed ware, Chinese celadon. Very recently from Baravati fort, we have got Chinese celadon which look more like 13th century Thai celadon rather than Chinese celadon. And then 14th, 15th century porcelains we have, the pagoda kind of porcelains that is typical of 15th century Chinese porcelain. These are the evidence which suggest great degree of connections. I'm not making the argument. I have been making an argument that we need to use a better model, a fractal geometrical model rather than a Euclidean circle where there is only one center, be it Nalanda or 3, 4 centers. It's more complex. It's a fractal Indian Ocean or beyond that. Look at the case of Gautama Sri, his disciple entering into Kublai Khan and performing Kala Chakra rituals. And Kala Chakra, there are many references to Ratnagiri as a major center of Kala Chakra. In Blue Annals talks of that. So therefore, what we have less data in Odisha, probably more data elsewhere. And therefore, we cannot aspire to come to the center stage just by talking about Bali Jatra. We need to find out other sources. For example, Subakara Singha is considered to be he not only studied at Ratnagiri and belonged to Odisha, he went to China, took away Sarvata Sangra and Bairochana Sutra, and then, from Vajrabodhi and others, Kukai took it to Japan. But the very fact that Suvakara Singha's contributions to the Singham Buddhism is attested by the fact that he is considered to be one of the 8 patriarchs of Shingon Buddhism in Japan. That suggests even though the Chinese annals talks of Kukai's relationship with Amoghavajra, and therefore we call it Amoghavajra traditions. But the very fact that Subakara Singha is mentioned or is considered to be one of the 8 great patriarchs in Shingon Japanese Buddhism is itself a testimony to the fact that the connection runs deeper than what are the facts which are available till now. Similarly, why did in 1292, Professor Andrea Acre showed the Chamunda inscriptions, the invocation part is in Sanskrit. Why did somebody just be, there is intercenine conflict. Kublai Khan's invasion was quite imminent because the ambassador was rebuffed by Kirtanagar. At this point, where there is absolutely no precedence of Chamunda worship, there are plenty of Durga in Odisha, in Southeast Asia, in Java. But just before 1292, a goddess associated with war, victory, which is Chamunda, is now being consecrated. And we have in Odisha the Kapalika Kolas, especially the Kolas. I have found many four-headed Devis, Bhairavis, which are part of the, let's say, Siddha Yogeshwara Mata, Jayadratha and others, which belong to the Tantric Saiva traditions. We don't have any, manuscripts unlike Tamil Nadu, which is very rich at Kashmir Savage. But we have iconography. We have iconography which talks about Kamakala Prayoga, which is part of Kola Tantra. Except Kolarnava Tantra, which is 11th, 12th century or maybe little later, we don't have any manuscript in Odisha State Museum on Saiva Tantra. But we have plenty of inscriptions. Today I have somebody's, not inscription, we have images, not inscription. We have images which can tell stories about, Tantric Saivism and Tantric Buddhism. In fact, Professor Andrea Acre's PhD work, which is on Dharma Patanjala. Everybody has this book, including me. And this is a pioneering work, and he's considered to be a great expert in Saivism. We should take opportunity, we should use his expertise to explore more on Saivism. That requires some degree of also familiarity with both Siddhantika text as well as non-Siddhantika text, which we find in Trika and other system of Kashmir. But the very fact that we have strong evidence of non-dualistic, Saiva Tantra, where Bhairava and Bhairavi are found all over Odisha. One-headed, two-headed, three-headed, four-headed Bhairava and Bhairavis. That obviously implies some kind of textual basis, ideological, religious basis, for which the Kolo traditions took up so much. And it's true, it's found all over Odisha. Yesterday, I found another Vajrahunkara image, very rare image in coastal Odisha. Thank you so much, Professor Acre, for agreeing to this talk. Hopefully, you will productively engage with Odisha and we'll work together. We are all lazy people. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. Indeed, I think that Professor Umakant could have given this talk instead of me, because his knowledge is extensive. In fact, he published also an article in a volume that I edited, and he could just have done the same talk, if better, probably. So, and I'm also grateful for your remark. The Kutila, the Kutila part is, in fact, it just means crooked, right? It's just the way sometimes they describe the script. Sometimes it's used for a bit of an earlier, some earlier text, like late Gupta script, which is in fact a late Gupta script, So the point is that it's very tricky, in fact, to give names to script. Some scholars, they say, let's just do without names and let's call Eastern India or, Pala script, or, because it's very tricky. They have all different ideas. But it's a good point. But the Gangas, definitely I should look at that. And also very interesting, the remarks, I totally agree. Chamundi is not found in Java before then, and there are many other statues like the Manjushri, Arapachana also in Java. It disappeared from central Java. Then for 200-300 years there is nothing, and then appears again during Kartanagara. So definitely, somewhere it must have been introduced from somewhere, and I think Odisha might have played a role, a more important role than scholars are ready to admit, precisely because of this willingness to have temples built around Kroda deities, or esoteric deities like Chamunda, etc. This doesn't happen in India, in many other parts of India actually. So and then you find it in Java, so there's definitely a connection there to be explored. Yes, so that's pretty much what I can say. So again, thank you very much for your remarks.
Thank you.
Yes.
Thank you, Makant sir. Thank you, Dr. Acre. Before we take any other questions, can I add something to what Dr. Acre and Dr. Mishra were saying about Subhakarasimha? And just continuing with your discussion, Subhakarasimha was the first actually of all the Vajrayana masters who went to China, right, Dr. Acre? Like after that, Amogha Vajra and others followed, and as you were talking about he being one of the patriarchs, considered as one of the patriarchs. Also, what I wanted to add is he also produced so many works on Chandi sadhana. Till then in China, nothing was had been created for Chandi sadhana. So with Subhakarasimha, other things like Dhyani Buddha Incorporation and so many other things started after, with Vajrayana, but Chandi sadhana works also, I think he had some contribution to that. And while listening to Dr. Acre's talk, when you were talking about Kritanagara and he's using Tantra to subdue Kublai Khan's forces, I was wondering, like, I think Kritanagara was 12th or 13th century, 12th century, right?
It was actually 13.
11,
So
12th,
13.
13th,
12,
yeah.
so
1290.
1260 to 1292.
Yeah, so
13th
around
century.
that time, Odisha had like Ganga period, like the kings of Gangas, and during 11th century, I think Chudaganga was the he's considered one of her like biggest emperors in the Ganga dynasty, Chudaganga, and legends say that he was an adept tantric himself, and he used help of tantra to establish his kingdom and all. So using tantra from those times, from 8th 9th century times of Vajrayana till, like, it was, I think, a continuous process even in the royal houses, which continued even further down. And you could see that in local kings and the Durgas, Jala Durgas, every Durga would have a Chandi. So going to a war or just for the protection of it, doing tantric rites had become, I think, a part of life. So which you see the similar things in Java and other places. I don't know how much it was in other parts of India like Bihar or Bengal, but in Odisha, I think it was there was a continuity in such tantric things used, and not just in the higher echelons, but in the normal, in the layman perspective, from the Sahaja Tantra used just for charms, like poison. Like I sent you that little thing you would have seen, in which you actually see all the Vajrayanic words, like Dr. Acre, I'm talking to here. Remember those words which are like Odia words, but then these have these remnants of that Tantra period. So I think somehow in the local life, the part of life, somehow it had become like a just a normal thing. So both hired like scholarly, then kings, royals, and even in the normal. So it was different, I think, in different ways, but there was some underlying commonality in all these things. And I was very interested in your Maldives examples, in the Buddhist stupas and the copper plates of the, I forget the names, but then as far as I remember, there was a place, a little island called, like in English it is written Gan, and in one of this Gan or Gan, a lot. So colloquially, that Gan, colloquially in Odia, we call village as Gan. So in colloquial Odia, so Grama is Sanskrit. Then Ga is in normal Odia, we will call Ga. So that when I was like researching about Maldives, and the first Hindu kingdom in Maldives also was the Aditya, Suradarsuna Aditya, who established the solar kingdom. And they, in their scriptures, it says that he went from Kalinga. Even the lunar dynasty also, Baladitya was from Kalinga, who got married to the princess from the Damahar. So there was some Kalinga connection which had happened centuries ago. Maybe because of that, the Buddhistic, monks and traders going to Sinhala, then Maldives. I think it was a continuous process till Islamization happened. So these were like, and of course your other things you mentioned about, all the Southeast Asian places, about all the scripts and all. I'll listen to your talk again, but enough of me. Let's take the questions from our audience. I'm sorry, I couldn't contain myself.
No, that's great. I would like to follow up later, with you about this Chandi, and also of course, I agree that Tantra was very much also it was a mainstream. I mean, it's kind of actually colonial perception of Tantra, like a marginal, aberration of Buddhism, which sometimes has been interjected also in India, that people are a bit wary, or a bit identified with black magic or mambo jumbo, but this is what most people actually were doing, all these tantric spells to protect from poison, snake bites, demons, diseases, all same, Dharani spells all over Asia, it's just very
Yeah,
similar
and it is
material.
not just
So it's
Buddhism,
enormous
it was
phenomenon.
absolutely not just from the Buddha heritage, but from the indigenous, the tribal Sabara Tantra heritage,
Yes.
from
Mhm.
Shaiva Tantra, from all different aspects. So that's why I think it was so much permeated throughout the different layers. So
Uh,
can we take
there
some
is
more
just
questions?
one insignificant thing that I want to point out here. In one of the slides, Professor Acre was showing, there are some Mula mantra. And if you actually have a read at it, they almost sound so similar to as children growing up in Odisha. We read storybooks. In the storybooks, a tantric would appear and he would read out the mantra. And those mantras were almost similar. Tarana, Marana, some all those things.
Mm.
So it was so familiar to read those mantras. It is part of our childhood story books and other also articles. Is it not so, Prita?
Mm.
Yeah, even the Charjagiti, Dr. Khageshwar Mahapatra, there's this book from 1950s, 60s, 70s, I don't remember, but it is written in Odia script. So for international scholars, it might be difficult to, read those and figure out more. So there is a lot of Charjagitikas from all different Kanupa, Luipa, Saraha, like so many Charjagitikas listed in the book, but it is in Odia script. So like I'll share that book PDF with you, but to decipher that into Romanized and all also, if you needed, we can do later. But yeah, before that, let's take some questions from
Sure.
our audience. So anybody wants to ask, like, please use your hand raise button or put your video on, we can ask you. Yeah. Anyone wants to, anyone has a question or Soumya?
I have a few questions, but that might deviate from the topic a bit. So I would love to keep it for the end. So yeah.
Okay. So, Dr. Akri, can Soumya ask you something which is not exactly related to this? It will deviate, but he has some, and he's a very young budding researcher with like lots of interest and knowledge about our Orissa's heritage. So, yeah, go ahead, Soumya.
Sure.
Hi, Dr. Akri. Because I know you are into not only Tantric Buddhism but also Tantric Saivism. Here in popular culture, in very popular culture who are not very familiar with what is Tantra and a bit more about the philosophy of Tantra, many we believe it is more Shakta centric, or how to say it. Any word to describe Shakta?
To
Uh,
Goddess,
describe,
like
I'm sorry.
goddess,
in
Shakta. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
goddess centric. So,
Mm.
out of your experience, how do you? My first question is, how do you see the correlation between Tantric Buddhism and Shakta Tantric is Tantrism, and then Saivism? Do you find any correlation? Or first of all, I would love to hear your perspective of what is Tantra. How do you define it from a very not only because my perception is from my tradition or my heritage, which I learned from my family or some other people out here. But as you are someone who came from outside, learn it, you might be giving a different perspective to it. So I would love to understand your perspective of Tantra and then the correlationship between these two or three tantric streams.
Yes. I mean, we need probably, I don't know, 1 week here to discuss about this thing. I mean, very good points. I mean, there's a huge debate about the relationship between Buddhist Tantra and Shaiva and Shakta Tantra, Scholars from many parts of the world are discussing this. And let's say, just to make it short, you may be aware of some theories that say that Buddhist Tantra is derivative from Shaiva Tantra. So Shaiva Tantra is the oldest, and then Buddhist tried to catch up. So they tried to write their own tantras because it was, Shaivas were so popular, and Shaktas, of course. I mean, Shakta is part of that kind of Shaiva, Bhairava stream. And this is a bit reductive, I think. I mean, it's true, you find evidence for that, but it's reductive. You also find evidence of the other way around. So that actually Shaivas took Buddhist material and adapted to their own tantras. I was actually reading the Tantra Sara Sangraha, a manual in Sanskrit from Kerala, who has a lot of Vajrayana mantras, Yamantraka mantras, Vajrabhairava mantras in a Hindu, perfectly, Shaiva, framework against snake bites, against, then enemies, and etc. So, I think you go back to the substratum. I think you need to actually see predating even, so the early, what people were doing in India, even before, these cults assumed the forms of the texts that we know before the 5th century. I think they were doing similar things. I think that, as somebody has mentioned, tribal religion, we can say that also many deities were some sort of natural also aspects, the Nagas, for example, or, yakshas, elephants, you see. So this is all parts of that, that what created tantras, even a philosophical one. And I think that some point when the Brahmins come to the fore, the elite try to repackage. The elite probably were a minority, the literate who could master perfectly Sanskrit, but they try to, instead of rejecting many things, they kind of incorporated. They took them and they put a stamp. Oh, this is Brahmin, this is Shaiva, or oh, this is Buddhist, this is Jainas. If you look at those, they're very similar. So I think there is a very difficult to entangle the relationship. So all of this is very correlated. And I think sometimes these were just denominations that the elite used. So it's very difficult to reply. But about Shakta Tantras, Professor Misha already mentioned the Jadrata Yamala, the Brahma Yamala tradition. So these are cremation ground traditions. You find exactly the same metaphor of the 8 cremation grounds, where you find the skulls. You have to do certain rituals at midnight to get certain siddhis. You find them in the Shakta Tantras, in the goddess-related text, in the Bhairava text, and also in the Buddhist Yogini Tantras. So they are so much related that you breathe the same atmosphere, the same air there. And that's exactly the problem to say why. What was the case? Who took from who? And this is a question that I'm not able to answer, but this is still fascinating, right? This kind of labeling something as a Yogini Tantra, but you could just put the label Shakta Tantra on it and change the name of the deity and nothing else changes. Yeah.
Thank you so much. I would love to still ask the second part of the question which I asked you, that how you define tantra, because one perspective is when people say you have some materialistic desire and you want to have them quickly, you have to achieve them quickly, then you do some rituals, that is tantra. But then another perspective is which go much more deeper into it. They define it as an philosophy, as an darsana. So what do you feel of the word itself,
Yeah.
tantra? Yeah.
I think that apart from the fact that there is the nirvachana, stanuti, right, and pranam, so the same way which spreads and saves, but this is the traditional nirvachana. But let's say tantra, as you say, I think is the system or the traditions, many different traditions. All of these traditions, maybe unlike other traditions, they admit both bhukti and mukti. They don't say you should not go after worldly needs, you should not go after worldly pleasures, you should not go after supernatural powers. They don't say that. They say you can. Be careful, because if you do that, you're not, you are kind of probably get stuck in, you can become a god for 1 billion years, but then you'll get stuck in samsara. But if you want to do that, it's okay. And in fact, if you are advanced, so advanced that you get the full set of supernatural powers of siddhi, that you can get anything you want, you're actually Shiva yourself. You are becoming almost like Shiva already. So there is still a chance for you. So liberation is power, is freedom. is unity with the universal consciousness, but at the same time, that gives you power to do certain things. So I think this system do not reject, siddhi, do not reject bhukti, but they also think that you can have both, or you can go for the siddhi only. It's okay, and they tell you how to do. They give you the manual to do that. Other systems in India are maybe a bit different in ancient India. Some dash like the yoga system, for example. There is this at the end, if you get very close to samadhi, you have the hindrances, and the gods invite you and they give you siddhi, and that you should not fall for that, because then you lose everything. You can go back. Tantra is not like that. You say, okay, if you want to go for that, be careful. You have to know how to do it, but you can, because that's the way to perfection also. And then you can also get liberation if you want.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Samya. Thank you, Dr. Acre, for that beautiful explanation. I was thinking when you were discussing this, like what a paradigm shift from Hinayana, like Theravada Buddhism, to Vajrayana, where Siddhartha Gautama's principles of like just detaching from every materialistic thing, to Vajrayana, where like they were trying to incorporate all these materialistic things into achieving something. Very interesting,
Sure.
this thing.
Yeah.
I see Dr. Viswabharti madam's hand raise button. Madam, if you have something, please unmute yourself and ask.
Namaste to everybody. Actually, I'm amazed to hear from Dr. Acre. We find when the merchants from Odisha were going to Southeast Asian countries for maritime trade, they were worshipping the Tantric goddess Mangala. And they were taking the idols or the living tantrics with them on their ships. We find one image on Konark temple, Bhairav dancing on a boat. So my question to Dr. Acre, do you find such examples in Southeast Asian countries? Please,
Not so much, unfortunately. You see, the problem with Southeast Asia is that the climate is even, let's say, more difficult for the preservation of artifacts than that of India, So unfortunately, we don't have much evidence, especially of the things you're referring to, as far as I know. But that doesn't mean that these things didn't exist. So
in many rituals, till though maritime trade is not active now, but still those rituals are people are doing those rituals in Odisha. So we find remnants of those rituals. Do we find that type of rituals in those countries? Tantric rituals in those countries?
Yeah, I mean, but let's say you're talking about specifically maritime connected, right? Like for the boat travel, this kind of things, right? That's, I mean, a study in itself. I think the problem is that we don't have much in terms of ancient evidence. So I'm not aware of texts that describe those rituals. But again, we have hardly any text describing tantric rituals. So this is the problem. So, but I mean, I know that, for example, in Java, in Bali, there are a lot of still rituals that you can say tantric, and many of these rituals are also done to protect, people, maybe people for traveling during their travels. And of course, there was a huge tradition also of, spells to protect mariners. We know that, right? And they were also found in Southeast Asia. In Dharani, in fact, we have one of those shipwrecks that we saw. A great source of evidence are shipwrecks. We find only 3 or 4 in Southeast Asia, in Java, And one of those has a bronze Dharani of Mahapratisara, if I'm not mistaken. Mahapratisara was a goddess precisely who averted, catastrophe, especially for merchants and mariners, So we have texts that describe. So, voila, I mean, you have a little piece of evidence that say that Buddhist monks, embarking on a ship, travel by ship, they brought with themselves, a statue, Buddhist goddess, or an amulet, with that dharani. So, of course, there were such rituals. I wish we had more evidence that describe actually.
Let me slightly elaborate what Vishwavarati Madam is trying to ask. In Odisha's all the ports, ancient port in the hinterland, which was connected by the river. So across those rivers, you will find tantric temples. So people who went out for maritime trade, from whichever village they would start their journey, they would offer tantric puja to the deity whose temple would be by the side of the river, and then they would go and reach the main harbor. So then they would load their merchandise on the ship and they would set sail. So her question was in this context.
And I see. Well, I mean, it's a fact that in the ancient Southeast Asia and South Asia, many, if not all, these temples were built near bodies of water, rivers, and so boats were there. Even Angkor, I was, if you go to Angkor, you can see actually reliefs of Avalokiteshvara on a boat. You go to Thailand, I don't know how many hundreds of kilometers, 200 kilometers from the coast, and you see Avalokiteshvara on a boat. I think he's also dancing on a boat almost. I think one of those ways. So, I cannot say, and Pima is a tantric temple in Thailand, by the way. So I'm sure that all these places have some kind of maritime, imaginary. And you find the Ashtamahabhaya Tara, right? You find these things. So I just don't have the full picture, you see. I will just find some pieces, bits and pieces of these things. And I just wish we had a more comprehensive account of how it worked. Yeah.
Thank you, madam. Question. Okay, that's fine. Thank you, Dr. Acre. I saw a chat message here, but I think it was self-explanatory. You already answered that. Like Sabitarani Sahu madam had asked, did the Shaiva Tantra and Shakta Tantra exist before Tantric Buddhism? But I believe you answered that, that you cannot just pinpoint which came first.
Yeah, exactly.
So, does anyone else have any questions or any comments? Till I see any other hand raise button, I also wanted to add one more little common thing. It's not a question, just from being from this land, like, from the local, like how we have grown up or what we have understood from our ancestors and all. Like, as I have understood this land, which is present day Odisha or what was Kalinga, the people always had been very grounded, very simple, like simple living. Like even the royals, even the kings and royals didn't have like huge mansions or very elaborate or lavish or luxurious ways of living or even dressing, or their Rajasinghas, what you call, like in other parts of the world or even India, you would see things, materialistic things used by the royals. But till a certain period of time in Odisha, at least I would say till 12th, 13th, 14th century, the way it was, the deities were considered the most important. So whatever monuments or whatever things you would see built, it is mostly for the deities, the temples, monuments, or the viharas for the scholastic people. So the social life, the recordings, it is more reflected in the walls of those walls and niches of those temples, monuments and all, how the people lived. Or so even a king you would see seated in a small, like a pedestal type of like a seat. It's not like a very huge or lavish seat, or the way their ornamentation was, or the way ornamentation of a normal person was much lesser than what a deity would be ornamented with. And never ever a king had depicted himself as being a form of Shiva or Buddha, or how we see that in other parts of the Indian Ocean, the trade circuit, like especially Southeast Asia. So here the philosophy of life was, I think, very different from the rest of India also. Odisha always had been a very secluded, because of the way it was placed at that time. I think its way of life, its philosophy of life was quite different. And that's why sometimes we don't find a lot of self praising, or like how we see in court records of other emperors, like people writing about the kings and all. Here we don't find many records like that. So that is a sad thing, that we don't have much records that way. But as Dr. Mishra, when he was talking, he was saying, and Dr. Acre with his visit this time, you would have realized whatever ruins are excavated till now, and whatever are waiting to be excavated, just like how the temple you saw in Bhubaneswar recently been excavated. Like there are so many places which are waiting to be discovered. So maybe with time and other things, we will find more tangible proofs, I feel. Like till now, we don't have that. But thanks to your work in like scripts or texts or records and other things, it is easier to connect the dots, I feel now, for people like us. So yeah, that was my thought. I don't know. It was just a thought, nothing.
Yeah, there was a wisdom, a pearl of wisdom, indeed. Thank you very much. I mean, it's very good to know, a very good reflection, that we should hope indeed that more will be discovered, and this heritage will help us to understand
Yeah,
the
and it
past
is
and
truly nothing is
identify.
one centralized. Everyone was connected with each other, and everyone was like culturally, and like the culture is a porous thing, I feel. It's not one linear way or one way or anything. Like everyone influences each other. So being linguistic and saying like no, we were the only one, or we did everything in other places, that is also wrong. I think we were also influenced by others. So to understand that in a bigger collective picture, I think would be much more relevant in the future. So
Yes.
if anyone, Subhendra Mishra sir, I see your video on. Did you have anything? Or before, I'll hand it over to Sunil sir now, because we have almost crossed 30 minutes of your time. So Subhendra Mishra sir, after yours, so thank you everyone. Yeah. Then over to you, Sunil sir, and thanks again, Dr. Acre. Merci beaucoup.
Thank you. Pleasure.
Sunil sir, unmute, please.
Sure. I must thank Professor Andre Acre for giving time, and it is already 2 hours since he joined, and he kept us spellbinding, and the discussion that we had today after Professor Acre's talk was also equally engrossing. Thank you. Thank you. And I must also thank Prita for making this webinar possible, for connecting Kalinga history to Professor Andre Acre. Thank you, Prita. And before actually closing, I must say, I still wait with a childlike curiosity to listen to your session, another session on Kalinga history about the Gaudi of Malay or Maldives. And there is one more topic also you're indicating. So please have some time in future also for us. And thank you for today's excellent talk. Thank you, everyone. Thanks for joining today. Good
Thank you, Sunil sir. Thank you, Dr. Andre. Good night.
Thank you.
Good night.
Namaskar. Jai Jagannath.
Namaskar.
History will never be dead till someone is willing to tell and someone is willing to listen.